Thank you for that, Sean. Just a little bit about me. I'm an IB history teacher and have been for about 20 years. And I also work with my school around data to support, as Sean talked about, increased participation and performance in the IB. So let me just say, in normal times, what IBSchoolImprovement.com focuses on is increasing participation and performance in the IB. We know two things. Number one, that the rigor of a student's high school curriculum is the number one indicator of bachelor degree attainment, not just going to college, but actually finishing. And so the way we look at it is the more kids that can access a rigorous curriculum, the better. And we believe the International Baccalaureate is the most rigorous and effective curriculum for students in the world. So our goal is to get more students to participate and perform in the IB. That's what we do in normal times. These are not normal times. So what we've been doing is trying to help schools navigate through the ever-changing kind of expectations from IB and develop an understanding of how to apply that idea of participation and performance, in these troubling times. Okay, so that being said, we're going to start with a question. And what I'd like you to do is, for a moment, consider, how do you award predicted grades now? Meaning, what is the practice that you engage in? How do you go about it? And just take a moment and reflect on that for like a minute or so about how you award predicted grades now. Okay. So as we go through today's presentations, we're going to have a period of pause points, as Sean pointed out, where you can ask questions, give comments, and engage in some discussion around the ideas that we're going to talk about today. Those pause points, you can either do them in the chat, and Sean will be monitoring the chat as we go through today's session, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and talk. But the idea is that we want you to be able to engage in this discussion and develop greater clarity and help the group as we move forward. Okay, cool. So the goals of this presentation for today. The first goal is to talk about how IB is going to award scores in May of 2021. And there's kind of a two-pronged approach, and we'll talk about both prongs and how they work together. Within those two approaches, there is a significant role for predicted grades in determining student scores. And so we want to talk about that. And then how can we use this knowledge that we're going to gain today to better support our students in these difficult and challenging times? So that's kind of what we're going to do today. So let's begin with number one. What did we learn from last year? What did we learn from May of 2020? The IB communicated two things clearly when they awarded scores in May of 2020. Number one is the internal assessment is extremely important and has a significant effect in student outcomes. We suggest that you review your IA scores from last year and engage in learning around how IB scored them, reflect on that practice and how to do better, okay? Because we know that's going to be extremely important. Number two, that our predicted grades, which have always been important, are uniquely important in this new era. So I'm going to ask, are your predicted grades in alignment with IB, and have they been? Because are your predicted grades statistically accurate? Because that's going to affect student outcomes in May of 2021. Two, how do you award predicted grades? How does that process work? And how can we make that process better? And number three, how do we shift from applying generous or conservative predicted grades to making those predicted grades more accurate. I feel sometimes, and this is true in some places and not in others, that teachers look at the predicted grade process as a reflection on themselves. And they generally think about the idea of, I don't want to be too generous, I don't want to go too low, and it kind of pushes kids into the middle, which is going to have a kind of negative effect in this year, but we're going to talk about that process now. So what do we know about May of 2021? IB has communicated that there are two paths for awarding scores in May of 2021. Schools that have students in the building and can give exams based on the reduced curriculum for this school year. Meaning if you have all of your kids in the building, you are comfortable with that, you can give exams. Those exams will be based on the reduced curriculum that was announced in August of 2020. That reduced curriculum is going to continue next year as well. So no matter what happens in the world, IB has communicated that the curriculum reductions that were put in place in August of 2020 will continue through the 2021-22 school year. All internal assessments will be scored by IB examiners. So unlike the process that existed prior to May of 2020, when we would score our internal assessments and send a sampling to IB for moderation, in May of 2021, the same process that will occur as in May of 2020, that all internal assessments will be submitted to IB examiners to be scored. Scores will be awarded based on modified grade boundaries, meaning that not only is the curriculum reduction in place, but the grade boundaries will be somewhat more lenient. For subjects like math, where the curriculum reduction really did not have a huge effect, we expect them to have a greater impact on the modified grade boundaries. So there'll be somewhat of a reduction in how those grades will be applied, and we'll wait till July to see what that reduction was. Now, schools that do not have students in the building or on a hybrid model do not have to give exams. At my school, for example, we now have about half of our students in the building, but half are not in the building and continue to learn virtually. Since we're in that hybrid model, we will not give exams. So if you do not give exams, how will scores be awarded? Number one, as in the situation above, internal assessments will be scored by IB examiners. Okay? And number two, scores will be awarded based on a combination of internal assessment score and the predicted grade. Meaning that scores will be computed using a formula where the internal assessment, depending upon the subject, will count between 20 to 40%. And predicted grades will count between 60 and 80% of the out of 100 score as in the past. Under either model, IB is asking schools to examine how they award predicted grades for May 2021, and are those predicted grades in alignment with historical performance for school, subject, and level. Okay, so if you are giving exams or you are not, you will have to award predicted grades based on an allocation of predicted grades provided by IB. What does that mean? That means that based on historical performance of schools for subjects and level, IB will provide schools with an allocation of predicted grades based on the number of students enrolled in a subject. That historical performance will be based on 3 years of previous data. It will not include May of 2020. May of 2020 was considered an outlier, so they will not use May of 2020. Instead, they will use May 2019, May 2018, and May 2017. So basically, IB is providing the number of 7s that you may award, the number of 6s you may award, and the number of 5s you may award. That allocation is school-based. It is based on the subject and the level. Schools may award less or lower than the allocation for each grade. You may not award more or higher, except, and here's the exception, schools may ask for a review based on a review-based exception. And that's really why we're here today, is the allocations are available. I'll talk more in a minute about how to look at them. But if you look at your allocations and go, it does not fit my current students, and I need to have some change in those allocations, IB will entertain the discussion of exemptions based on kind of 2 ideas. Number one, your students are different, or student is different, or does not fit the previous pattern. Or number 2, that you look at previous data and say that the 2018 was an outlier year and should not be included in the exemptions. Schools that are new, meaning that you have not awarded grades, or if you're not given exams, or subjects that are new, meaning that you have had a history of giving exams, but you have a new subject. So say you're starting IB economics this year. If you're new, you will not receive an allocation. Instead, you will receive guidance based on historical performance. How does it work? Historically, IB is going to look at the percentage of scores achieved. In this example, and these are based upon school, subject, and level. So I'm an IB history teacher. I teach HL. So basically, that breakdown could look like this. Historically, 11% of students have earned a 7, 21% of students have earned a 6, 32% have earned a 5, and so on. What IB will then do is look at the number of students you have currently enrolled, scheduled to take the exam. They will then apply those percentages. So if you look at it, if I currently have 30 students, 11% of that will be 3.16. If I currently have 30 students, 21% of that would be 6.32. They will then round those numbers up. So no matter what happens, you will see the numbers rounded up. So in this case, the allocation for this subject for 7s would be you'd be allocated 4 7s. Your allocation for 6s will be 7. So when you go to award predicted grades, you can award fewer than 4 sevens. You just can't award more than 4 sevens. And if you go into IBIS, you will see the distribution available, the predicted grades, and the distribution that's available. For me, I have 189 students. I have been allocated 1 7, 26 sixes, and so forth. Again, I'm able to award up to those numbers, but I can't go over those numbers without asking for an exception from IB. I realize this is a controversial idea, and what we're going to talk about next is how to deal with those exceptions if you feel these allocations are not appropriate for your current students. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to have a pause point. I know that was a lot, and I ask for your questions, thoughts, and discussions. You can either do it in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and unmute, you can ask questions.
Tim, we've had a couple questions roll in. So one of them is, if we have a new class, they were still given allocations, even though that course has never been taught at the school. So how does that work?
That allocation is, at least the guidance that I've been given, is that is not a true allocation. That is guidance. And since your course is new, you can communicate to IB that goes, this does not apply in my current situation. And I would suggest, if you have those questions, those go to the IB help desk. But the guidance that they have given so far is for a new course, even though the way IBIS is communicated looks like an allocation, it is merely guidance.
All right, I had a similar question, but it was an established course, but there's a brand new teacher. So that teacher has never taught that course before. And effectively they're given the last teacher's allocation. And how does that all work?
Okay, so at this point, IB does not, in their statistical analysis, take into account teachers. So for example, as you saw in mine, I have 189 students. That's 5 teachers who teach those students. So they don't take into account which teacher teaches which student and the teacher's historical performance. So if you have a new teacher or you significantly change how you approach the curriculum, probably the best way to approach this is to ask for an exemption. But at that point, they're going to ask you for some version of evidence to support that exemption. And that's what we'll talk about next.
Excellent. Those are the 2 questions that I got. If there are other questions, again, you can either feel free to unmute, or if you want to raise your hand, I can call on you then. Oh, a couple questions rolling in. Can you please share an example of evidence, which I think we'll get to a little bit later on in the presentation? What does it mean by not more than the allocation? Is it on an average or a per grade level?
Okay, the allocations are given by course and level. So by the school, the course, and the level. So each school will receive a particular allocation for each subject at each level. So history HL will be given an allocation, history SL will be given an allocation, and so forth and so on. Those allocations are based on the percentage of grades that were scored in the past and the number of students enrolled for the exam session. So if you go back to this example, I have 189 students enrolled. This allocation adds up to 189, which is basically the number and amount of grades that I can award. And again, what IB's instruction has been is I can award less. I just can't award more. So I have 1 7 available. I don't have to predict anyone at a 7, but I can't predict more at a 7, without asking for an exemption.
So if you wanted to award more than 1.7, you would have to ask for that exemption and provide IB evidence as to why you want to go off script, if you will, or off the allocation. Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay, we good?
Let's see, we just got another one. At the end, it is their final score which will matter, right?
Okay, again, and this goes back to the two ways of awarding scores. If you take exams, this will have much less impact. If you're not giving exams, the predicted grade becomes between 60 and 80% of the final mark. Now, there's one other bit of good news that comes out of this. If you predict a student at, say, a 4, IB will award that student the top end of that band. So if you predict a kid as 4, they get the highest 4, and then that is averaged in with their internal assessment score, and that's how they'll get their grade. But that is if you're not giving exams.
All right, Tim, we also had a note that some schools actually are face-to-face, but then they're not doing exams. So I didn't know if you wanted to comment on that.
That came out in the survey possibility, and that is a decision between the school and IB, and that's cool. Basically what people have is what IB's instructions has been is if you think you're going to give exams and go down that road. But if you're not, it is easier to shift from the exam route to this other route than to go the other way. And basically you can't go the other way. So, if you think you're going to give exams and later realize you can't, this process will take over. And if you give exams, then you just give exams.
And then we had two final questions. One wanted to know, do you know if the boundaries for the examination route and the non-examination route are the same?
I don't know that. I believe they would be, but I can't answer that unequivocally.
Gotcha. So there was another question. So if they've been allocated 0 predicted grades of 4, that means that they can't give any students 4s then?
Okay, if you have numbers above that, so if you have an allocation of, like if you look at my example up here on the screen, I have no allocations for 1s. I can award 1s if I want. The problem is I can't award more than the number of something above. So I can't award more than 26 6s, but I can award less of them. Okay, cool. So let's go on. Regardless of the scenario for a school, IB is clearly communicating the significance and value of predicted grades. And they're basically saying we value your predicted grades. They're so important they become part of the exam record. Now the question becomes is, what do we do moving forward? What is our action plan for May of 2021? And the first thing I'm going to say is to understand your history of predicted grades and the alignment to IB scores. Okay? First, you need the data. In IBIS, IB provides detailed results for past exam sessions. This data is somewhat difficult to manipulate, but it is very detailed and very rich and can tell you a great deal about how scores were achieved. There are 3 data files in IBIS: the subject results CSV, the candidate results CSV, and the component result CSV. CSV stands for comma separated value. They are basically the equivalent of large Excel files. Unfortunately, the data provided is not provided in a user-friendly format. What we do is, what we do is use a dynamic interactive visualization to empower leaders and teachers with immediate, detailed, and actionable feedback. So I'm going to use an example from our tool, but what I want to talk about is how do you understand your history of predicted grade alignment to IB scores? So let's go here, let's go over here. And what I want to do is, this is a school, this is History HL. Up here, you can see the alignment from 2019 of the number of scores received, students, and their percentages. What I want to talk about is this graph down here. Across the bottom, you're going to see the average predicted grade. You're going to see the predicted grade or the exam score 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and then the variance that occurred in those predicted grades. Meaning statistically, of the students who earned a 6, how accurate was that prediction? Negative numbers means the prediction was slightly lower. Positive numbers mean the prediction was slightly higher. What we have found statistically, that if you have a variance within 0.5, you are relatively in alignment with IB. It is extremely hard to predict perfectly, but if you predict well, it is benefiting your students. So if you see in this subject, you see a history of relatively good predicted grade variance. It's always going to get a little higher down at the bottom because we tend not to want to predict low. But in general, for the most part, they're within plus or minus 0.5. Let's look at another example. This is design and technology. And what you're going to see is their variance is much, much higher. Students who earned a 6, on average, were predicted to earn a 7. Students who earned a 5 were predicted 1.5 marks above that. Students who earned a 4, that trend continues. This is an example of predicted grades that are out of alignment with IB. The other way to look at it, and I find that teachers prefer this view, is this is a scatter plot that basically shows the predicted grade across the bottom and the exam grade. So if you go look at each group, this student was predicted as 7, earned a 6. These 3 students were predicted as 7 and earned a 5. These 2 students were predicted as 7 and earned a 4. So if you look at this group, this is a consistent over prediction, which is what the variance told us from the other graph. But you're seeing that these predictions are kind of consistently out of alignment with what the student actually scored. Predictions like this will lead to lower allocations. And those allocations will seem out of alignment with teacher expectations. So the first thing to understand, let's go back here now. The first thing to understand is your history of predicted grades in alignment with IB. The second thing to understand, is to understand your outliers. And let's talk about outliers. An outlier, for example, is this: a student who was predicted at a 6, but earned an exam score of 3. Now, if you click on the bubble, it will actually show you the student's name. This is a demo version, but you can actually see the student name. And now what you can do, and this is, I think, important, because now you want to go and understand, how did a student who was predicted at a 6 earn a 3? So I'm going to go over here. There's student 1873. If you click on that student, what you're going to find is the component breakdown of how that student actually earned a score. And what I'm going to say is, it is important to understand the outliers, because without understanding the outliers, we're going to, since we're under this allotment system, if you don't understand your outliers and how they affect your outcomes, you're awarding predictions and making choices between students that might be inaccurate. Okay. Oops. Third thing I'm going to say is that we need to reflect on how we award predicted grades. And this goes to the example of how to request exceptions. If you're going to request exceptions, you need to understand your history of predicted grades. Because remember, that's what IB based those allotments on. And you need to consider your practice for awarding predicted grades. We need to shift away from applying generous or conservative predicted grades to applying more accurate predicted grades based on evidence. How does your predicted grade align with your course grade? Are your predictives in alignment with what students actually receive as a course grade? In my world, I look at it as a 6 is an A 5 is a B, a 4 is a C. And that way the predicted grade comes into alignment with course grades, and students can kind of understand where they are and know what they need to do to improve. Finally, you need to consider, might want to consider a standard-based grading model that brings your course grade, predicted grade into alignment with IB scores. So what I'm trying to say here is, we've received our allotments of our predicted grades. We know what our allotments are, and we know what our students are, and we can look and see, do those two things fall into alignment? If you feel they don't, you can ask for an exemption, but your exemption has got to be based in some way on the evidence of the past. If you can go and say, well, this was what it looked like in 2019, but practice has changed, and let me explain how that will affect outcomes. We have a new teacher. We changed our type of instruction. We reflected on this process. So what you need to do is understand how much IB understands about your history. And remember, they're not going to use 2020. They're going to use 2019, 2018, and 2017. You've got to understand your history of predicting grades. You've got to understand your outliers, and you need to consider processes which bring you into greater alignment with IB expectations. Let's pause for questions, thoughts, discussion.
Yeah, so there was a question in the chat just about the slides and the recording, those will all be sent to you at the conclusion of the presentation. They'll be sent to anybody who signed up to the email addresses that were given. If you happen to get the link in another way, if you could just either direct message me your email address, or you can email us at info@ibschoolimprovement.com, and we'll make sure you get a copy of the slides. And then Juan has his hand raised.
Hi, it's Joanne.
Sorry.
It's okay. I just wanted to ask, so are we sure that the IB calculation of the final grade is just going to be based on the higher boundary of the predicted and the internal assessment? Because that's not what they did for 2020. And it was actually looking at the school context, and then they retracted that. And then it was mostly the internal assessment that dictated that, when there was only 1 mark away. So that's quite a shift, my understanding.
Yes, they are not using the process that they used. The summer of 2020 was, as we all know, rocky regarding scores. They went through the school context scaling, and then they basically in August, they changed grades and basically based those final grades mostly on the internal assessment. This is a significant change from that. And the reason for the change, as explained by IB, was that scores as a result for the May 2020 exam session were not historically in alignment with scores. And therefore, I believe that was not fair. And this is a process to try to make that scoring more fair. And yes, this is the process that will be used. You can consult on IBES or on the other portals. This is the process that they're going to use for now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Tim, there was another question in the chat, and it was, so if a school, if they've never had students that got a 7, but this year they have a student that's capable of getting a 7, what should they do? How can this be allocated?
Okay, so I think this becomes the point of asking for an exception. And at that point, I think what you're going to have to do is say, if it is a particular student, you're going to have to say why this student is different than previous students and why this would occur. That's why I think the evidence that you use when you apply for these exceptions needs to be clear and consistent. And you need to say, one of the things is, we haven't gotten a 7, this student can get a 7. Let me give you evidence that says this student is performing at this level of the rubric. And so that's why I think it's important to be able, and let me just go back over to our tool for a minute, to be able to go and look at past performance. And let me get a kid who's up here. Hold on, there we go. And be able to say that the student's rubric performance is consistent with what would have scored a 7 in previous years. And if you have that evidence for IB, I think they're going to be more likely to allot you a 7 based upon the exception. Okay, anything else?
Again, you can either drop your question in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you. All right, we have a question. With a change in the language A curriculum, the IOSs do not in any way resemble the earlier IOCs.
Okay.
So predicted grades could defer from earlier historical evidence.
Right, I got it. I'm good. Okay, so this is particularly for English and math teachers, or language A teachers and math teachers. IB has said that both language A and math are on new curriculum. What they've said regarding the English is that the new curriculum is close enough to the old curriculum that the allocations are appropriate as awarded. So basically they're saying that they're close enough that those allocations would be acceptable. For math, the answer is the same for HL. They, however, have said that SL, math studies and math SL, are significant enough that they had to change the way the allocations were awarded slightly. But basically, the answer they're going to say is that the allocations are the allocations. I know that's an uncomfortable answer, but that's the answer they've given.
May
Okay.
I speak?
Sure.
Actually, though IB has claimed that the language A curriculum, that is English, is quite similar to the earlier curriculum, I'm surprised to find it that it isn't, because IOCs were quite literature based. They weren't language based, but now there is a combination of it. So it is quite a bit different. I don't know how they have come to this conclusion, but could we give that as an exception, or is it not possible if historical grades were lower?
I think that would be a perfectly appropriate discussion for an exemption. And I do understand the frustration that people have with this process, and it exists. I think discussing the curriculum relative to the allocation will be an appropriate grounds for an exception.
Okay, thank you so much. That means the same would apply for even paper 1, because paper 1, the structure has changed from 2 guided questions. It has become a single one, and there is a more focused point of entry. So I think the same would apply in this case too.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, we've got a couple others. So one was just the question about the student who maybe could get a 7 that hasn't gotten a 7 before. How do you use evidence from previous years if nobody's ever gotten a 7 before? And I think what your answer was you're going to talk more about the student than the history of the grades.
Right. You're going to talk about the student performance vis-a-vis the boundaries. And so what you'd want to do is to understand the grade boundaries as they existed in the past, and then go, this student score, the current student score, vis-a-vis the rubric scores that you have using classroom evidence would be supportive of a 7. So to saying that, you're basically making the argument that you understand what a 7 looks like on the rubric, and this student is performing at that level.
All right, excellent. And then we had one final question is, can we provide school summative assessment scores and term exam scores as evidence?
I believe, yes, you can. And I think that's kind of what I was just talking about. As long as those summative assessments are basically IB assessments that go, you're using IB questions, you're grading on the IB rubric, yes.
All right, and that's all the questions that we have right now.
Okay, Sean, you're up.
All right, so part of it is we want to thank you all for coming today, and thank you to Tim for offering up this information and trying to offer a little clarity in what might otherwise be a little confusing state of affairs. So I mean, with that, we wanted to go over some things that we offer here at IB School Improvement that can help you get started with this work. So one of those things is the data visualization tool that Tim was going over. That is not a free service. We offer these free webinars because we want to help get information and the word out, but then there are some other services that we do offer to help us keep the lights on here. So with those, we offer this tool, and we can go back about 5 years worth of data analysis in your IBDP student performance. And I will say, if you end up getting the 5 years of data, then we do offer complimentary coaching on just how to use that data to turn it into action with that. You know, if you always have the option to get less than 5 years of data. And so that comes at its own rate. With that, additionally, we offer, Tim, if you can go ahead and hit the next one, there we go. Paradigm shifting professional development to uncover what is often the black box of IB exam results for your entire DP team. So schools, they really find this PD to be truly game-changing, as it uncovers exactly how a DP assessment, how the components lead to the results at the student level. And it also allows teachers to refocus curriculum and their assessments. And then finally, we offer support to groups of subject-specific teaching teams. So this support has been described as the best IB-focused PD teachers have ever received. This is because what we do is we collaborate with leading examiners and PD leaders who dig deep into the actual student performance at your school by reading the graded IAs and examination papers. And then what they do is they take that information and they design extremely specific, subject-specific PD focused on observed patterns in student learning. So we're currently offering this support in IB Lang, IB Lit, IB History, IB Psychology, and IB Business, in addition to economics, biology, all the maths, and TOK. If you're interested in receiving any of these supports or simply want to contact us for more information, you can always reach out at IB School Improvement, info@ibschoolimprovement.com. Our website is www.ibschoolimprovement.com. And again, we're on Facebook and Twitter at the links there. If you want to, like us or follow us, help us get the word out. Again, we're really just trying to help as many people as possible to clear up some of the confusion that's out there. Tim and I will stick around for probably about another 2 minutes here, but this concludes the formal presentation. If you have any final questions, we'll be here for about another 2 minutes if you want to unmute or ask him in the chat. But other than that, thank you for coming today, and we hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Hi, Sean. I think I have another question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with okay. So the scenario for my case is that the allocated PG for a 3 PG 3 is 1, but in my current class, I think I cannot give a 3. So the minimum that I can give is a 4. So do I need to ask for exemption? But I have an allocation of, let's say, PG7 is like 4, and I cannot fill in the 4 there because I believe my current students, only 3 of them can get a 7. And then, although the allocation is 4, allocation for PG6 is a 3, but I can only give 2. But then there is a allocation for PG3 1. Do I have to give a 3?
I think this would be grounds for an exemption. And I think at this point you would say, look, I'm not using these allocations in this way, but I do not want to award this. I do not want to use this allocation this way. And, base it upon like the evidence that you have and see what happens.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
All right. I think that about wraps it up. So thank you all again for coming. I'm going to go ahead and end the session. Hope you have a great rest of your day.